Senator from Arizona.
Mr. President, I come to the floor once again to discuss the threats facing our country, the challenges confronting the brave men and women of our armed forces. I feel compelled to remind my colleagues of what's at stake because of our failure right here to provide them the resources and equipment they need and deserve is placing their lives at greater risk. That is not my opinion. That is the opinion of the uniformed leaders of our country who have stated time after time that because of our sequestration, our mindless meat acts, that we are putting the lives of the men and women who are serving our nation in uniform at greater risk. Don't we have an obligation to try to stop that? Obviously, there's not a majority here in the Senate who believes that we should, to our everlasting shame. Unless we change course, we'll only continue that failure. We're about to vote on yet another omnibus appropriations bill. It's well over 1,000 pages. And friend, look here. This is what we're about to vote on without a single amendment. Without a single amendment. Is there any member of the United States Senate that has read this? Is there any member that has read this bill of over $1 trillion that we're about to vote on? And many of us are going to be compelled to vote for it because we don't want to shut down the government again. The American people don't want the government shut down, no matter what some colleagues of mine say. But here it is. I challenge any of my colleagues to come to the floor and tell me they have read this bill. Is it of any wonder that the American people are fed up with this way of doing business? 1,000 pages, 1,000 pages. That's what we're going to vote on in a relatively short period of time. Haven't read it, no amendments. And I'm sure that there may be some provisions in this 1,000-page document that members would like to modify, like to add to. But what do we do in business? What's the world's greatest deliberative body doing here in a couple hours? We're going to vote yes or no on a 1,000-page document. Shame on us. Shame on us. Not a single appropriations bill. We have an appropriations committee. They have their subcommittees. My friend and colleague from Vermont is here going to want to talk about it. And they turn out individual bills, I believe 13 of them, one of them being defense, by the way. But all of that, without amendment, without debate on the floor of the world's greatest deliberative body, that we're going to go ahead and vote yes or no. And many of us are going to vote yes because we don't want to shut down the United States government. We don't want to deprive our citizens of the goods and services and provisions that a government is supposed to provide people. I don't want to shut down the Grand Canyon again, my friends. I don't want to deprive people from all over the world from the ability to see the Grand Canyon. So what are we going to do? What did we do? CRAs. I'm all in favor of repealing regulations that are onerous and bad for America and small businesses in large. But is that a rationale for what we're about to do? And I'd say to my friends on the other side of the aisle, you blocked many of these bills that we wanted to bring to the floor. You blocked them. Why? For what purpose? And of course, on this side of the aisle, we agree to do something like that. And so I just say to my colleagues, you should not be curious when you see the approval ratings in the teens of the Congress of the United States. And again, as I say, we'll be blamed for putting our men and women in uniform at greater risk. That's not John McCain's view. That happens to be the opinion of our uniformed service chiefs who are telling us that when we aren't funding the military, we're putting the lives of the men and women serving at risk. So we passed the Budget Control Act 6 years ago, With an attempt to address our spending problem, this legislation led to a $443 billion cut to defense. $443 billion to defense. But what has also happened? Deficits came down for a while. We're on track to return to $1 trillion deficits again in a matter of years. The national debt is set to hit $20 trillion, has grown, and will continue to grow. In other words, we slashed our military, my friends. We slashed it. Yeah, great job. We slashed the spending on the military. In fact, if you look, you'll see that the only portion that has been a reduction in spending is, guess where? Defense. When you look at the last several years since sequestration, do you think the world has gotten safer? Do you think that the men and women who are serving are better protected? Do you think they're better equipped? We have 60% of our F-18s are not flying. Why? Lack of parts. We've had 2 submarines tied up at the pier for a year because they can't leave the pier. The Air Force is 1,000 pilots short. So what have we done? We've cut defense spending by 4%. Meanwhile, the interest on the debt has increased by 7%, non-defense 19%, and the elephant in the room, my friends, that none of us want to touch, the third rail, mandatory spending. That's Social Security and Medicare primarily. So what have we done? We've shortchanged the men and women who are serving in the military and trying to defend this nation, while non-defense spending has gone up by 19%. So the next time I hear one of my colleagues say, well, we should continue to cut defense spending because of the debt, we've already done that. We've already shortchanged the men and women who are defending this nation. Over the past 10 years, as I mentioned, mandatory spending has grown by 56%, and defense has been cut by 4%. The death spiral, and we're in the budget cuts, high operational tempo, and the military is now in a vicious cycle. The death spiral works like this. This is the death spiral, okay? Constant and frequent deployments increase costs. To send our men and women overseas in harm's way, it increased costs. The more you fly a plane, the more it will cost you to maintain the plane. The more you deploy a soldier, the more you'll have to pay him or her to stay in the military. When budget top lines are determined by politics and not requirements, the Department of Defense has to make trade-offs. For example, the military may forego buying new equipment to keep up with wartime costs, but this exacerbates the problem. Our equipment gets older as it's used more, and the cost for maintaining aging equipment skyrockets, okay? Here's the death spiral. Why the state of our military is what it is today. 3, count them, 3 out of our Army brigades are are ready at the highest level of readiness. 4 of 64 Air Force squadrons are ready to, quote, fight tonight. 4 out of 64. Less than half of the Marine and Navy planes are ready for combat. The Air Force has a pilot shortfall of 1,500, 1,000 of which are fighter pilots. The Navy has a maintenance backlog of 5.3 million days. The ship maintenance backlogs are so bad that some ships, like the submarine USS Boise, is tied up in port, isn't qualified to dive, and recently missed a deployment. Look, these are the aircraft, of all of them, that are fully mission capable. These are the Army units that are ready to fight tonight. This is the United States Air Force. These are the airplanes that are ready to fight. Marine Corps aircraft, the same way. So here we are with this situation, and what are we doing? We aren't really addressing the issue because we're going to be faced in the next year or so with the same budget problem of sequestration. This is happening. Our enemies aren't sitting still. Our adversaries are not waiting for this body to wake up to do its job and to act. While we have forced our military to make trade-offs between supporting immediate operational requirements and future modernization, China, Russia, and other adversaries have been singularly focused on developing military capabilities to target United States forces and take away our unique military advantages. Our military has multiple missions. Our adversaries' militaries have one mission: undermining U.S. military superiority. I regret to inform my colleagues that they are succeeding much more than we anticipated. The fact is that the U.S. military advantage is eroding. The National Security Advisor General H.R. McMaster summed it up best when he testified that our Army, United States Army, is outgunned and outranged. The reality is not much different across the military services. The President understands it. Rebuilding the military has been a major priority for this administration, but we got to face a simple fact: the military buildup proposed by this president is illegal because the Budget Control Act forbids it. Over the next 4 years, the Budget Control Act's caps on defense spending would leave President Trump $216 billion short. Even President Obama's budget was $113 billion above the BCA caps, and that budget would have barely slowed the deterioration of our military readiness and capability. I regret to say, Chairman Thornberry, the distinguished chairman of the House Armed Services Committee, and I fare even worse against the BCA. We believe that rebuilding our military will require a defense budget of $640 billion in fiscal year 2018. Sustaining that level of funding over the remaining years of Budget Control Act would require an additional $433 billion. To give our men and women in uniform a budget that will allow them to rise to meet the challenges of the 21st century, Congress must change the Budget Control Act, and the only way to do that is with a bipartisan budget agreement. But as we stand here, there is no serious conversation that I'm aware of in this body or anywhere else in Washington about what the agreement would look like and how it would be achieved. The next 4 years can't be like the last 4 years. We must find a way to provide the military with the resources they need and deserve to perform the missions that we've assigned them. We must provide them with timely authorization and appropriations bills. We must provide them with something they haven't had for years: certainty, so they can properly plan and efficiently use taxpayers' dollars to defend the nation. So, what are we looking at right now? We're going to pass this thing. It'll pass. It'll pass. And then September. How many months is that now? About 5 months from now, in September, we're going to be bumping up against the same ceiling and the threat of shutting down the government. Are we going to wait till the beginning of September before we start to address this or not? Is that the kind of fiscal cowardice that we're going to perform? We're going to see this movie again and again and again and again unless we repeal the Budget Control Act and start providing the men and women who are serving this nation and the challenges we're facing, which in the view of any military expert will tell you they're the greatest they've been in 70 years. We've got to stop this. We've got to stop this. We'll paper over our failures with continuing resolutions. We'll cut piecemeal deals in the midnight hour that fail to fix the serious challenges this country faces. We'll accept these outcomes because they are better than year-long continuing resolutions or shutdown. We'll clear the pitifully low bar of success we've set for ourselves, and all the while challenges we've been charged to address will only get worse. We've got to break this cycle. After several years of political gridlock, we know that a bipartisan budget deal will be necessary to pass appropriations bills. Let's try a novel idea. Let's try a novel idea. Why don't we work on the deal now? Why don't we sit down together, all of us recognizing the challenges to our national security, and fix this problem instead of kicking the can down the road? And my friends, if we do not, I guarantee you, we will be doing this same thing again in September. And what is that? We'll be looking at another 1,000-page bill, 1,000 pages, which none of us have read, which none of us know. Oh, I take it back. There's maybe 4 or 5 senators that know what's in it. Maybe 4, maybe 5, maybe as many as 8 out of 100 will know about it. But if we don't stop this, that is exactly the movie we're going to see come September. Not acceptable. Don't we owe the men and women who are serving in uniform in harm's way, killed in the last few days, don't we owe them more than what we're giving them? Don't we owe them the best equipment and the best training that we can possibly provide them with, rather than being dictated by a meat axe called sequestration? Don't we? Mr. President, I yield the floor.
Mr. President,